Good afternoon and welcome to Lunchtime series where we add value to people's lives, happening every Thursday on ebizradio.com. You can catch the Lunchtime series on all major podcast channels, and in our marketing and leadership segment today with Kevin and Craig, you're joining us as per usual, the wonderful expert in marketing and communications. Craig Pagely, how are you doing, Craig?
Yeah, Kevin, thanks. I love the intro. I'll claim it.
Absolutely, always.
Fantastic. Yeah, good to be back. But my goodness me, it felt like we only spoke yesterday. It's just this last week has really screamed by.
Yeah, and I don't know that, like they say, time flies when you're having fun, and I'm like, I'm not sure I'm having fun, but the time's really flying. So, like, that saying might need to change.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one. Yeah.
So, Craig, you can. What can you share with the listeners? Sorry, I'm just getting my wits about me here. But what can you share with the listeners as a reminder of last week's fascinating conversation around marketing resilience?
Yeah, Kevin, thanks. I want to reference the article, How to Cultivate Marketing Resilience in Times of Uncertainty, as a reminder of last week's conversation. The article was published by Liz Elton on 24th of April 2020 and can be found on skyword.com. So resilient marketing adopts the following themes to achieve its objectives, Kevin. Firstly is prioritize strategic spending to foster growth. And as we spoke about, do not slash budgets. Marketers who only see the short-term issues generally cut spending during a recession. However, on the other hand, brands that actually continue to market and spend during these recessionary moments are well positioned to take the advantage when the economy rebounds. The second point is adapt quickly to new context, and agile brands that respond fast to changing circumstances. Well, take note, offering support, words of hope, resources, etc. during a crisis will definitely stay top of mind with their audiences, and the COVID pandemic was definitely proof of this. The third point there is operates with a growth mindset. And resilient marketing requires this growth mindset, Kevin, to be effective. And for instance, that's where seeing failure and difficulty as an opportunity to grow. And brands need to be willing to take on these informed risks and make those necessary changes to thrive. The fourth point is search for opportunities. Marketing resilience depends on being optimistic and tirelessly searching for prime opportunities, even though, as we know, marketing in uncertain times is definitely not easy. The fifth and second last point here is these brands, they pivot to support organizational priorities. And resilient marketing requires constant review, recalibration to support the changing organizational needs, and that iterative process that we spoke about a lot last week, and means that breaking down the silos between departments so that the likes of marketing, sales, and services can actually come together to work towards the most important business goals. And then finally, Kevin, resilient marketing fosters a culture of unity, and probably one of the most important points, where the marketing departments often have to do more with less, often placing huge amounts of strain and pressure on staff, which means that the human capital is in this instance much more valuable than ever before in building that strong culture around the brand's value, around the marketing vision, and the objectives will help keep that team unified and resilient. And those are the reminder points from last week.
Yeah, Craig, I think it's one of the conversations we've had previously around, when change happens, as much as the COVID pandemic really did force us to change, marketing generally is the first thing to be slashed. And yet there were brands, I think one of the shows we had, there were brands that sort of stepped it up a gear.
Yes.
And because they did, they came out winning because they amped up their marketing. So I think that's such a strong point, and something that people always need to realize, that because I think that also ties into that operates with growth mindset part of it. And marketing is there for a reason, and you need to be able to speak to your customer base effectively, especially in trying times, because they also respond to the trying times, but how you support that and how agile you sort of move around it is important.
Yeah, and how you support them through the trying times as well. Yeah, most important.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So what are we chatting about today, Craig?
Yeah, Kevin, I mentioned last week that I want to continue with the theme of resilience, but this time shifting away from the marketing focus towards drivers of resilience in business. And according to McKinsey, such resilience requires a balanced focus on 6 dimensions.
I'm definitely looking forward to hearing about the 6 dimensions. So I mean, tell me about it.
Okay, so I want to start off with one or two of the statements from last week, because again, they set a really great context and a segue to today's topic, Kevin. So learning from the Forrester.com reference of last week, as we move to a new normal, sales and marketing leaders realize that resilience and agility are more important than ever before, and that they can't afford to spend valuable time and resources developing plans that aren't meaningful when the next disruption occurs, regardless of the size of that disruption. The second reference, again, is from corporate compliance insights.com, which then stated that strategic resilience is the capacity to turn those threats into opportunities and the ability to take advantage of the opportunities in a timely, non-crisis-like manner. So in preparation, after considering those and in preparation for today's conversation, I came across an really interesting report of the inaugural edition of Future Proof with Dimension Data, which was launched in association with Business Day. And the report noted, Kevin, that more than 2/3 of the respondents agreed that business agility and the ability to respond to change will be driving decision-making over the next 12 months. The report then, goes on to note that over the past 12 months, the rate of change in the global business environment had actually accelerated more rapidly than we've ever experienced. And in fact, some observers claimed that in the last 12 months, we have compressed more than, take note, 5 years of change, disruption, and advancement in business operations as a result of the COVID pandemic. And this level of speed change brought with it significant existential risks to many organizations and industries. And what was really key about that particular report and the previous two references from last week is that there's a key theme that emanates here, and that is one of agility or reacting to change in a timely manner, something that definitely not all businesses are prepared for, Kevin.
Craig, as you speaking through this, what occurs to me about this is the survival of the fittest. It's almost agility has become the business. Agility and adaptability has become business's way of going, who's the survivor at the end of the day, and you're survivor of the fittest. And I think through your agility and adaptability and showing how you're actually capable and how smoothly and able you are to transition between those two, that in itself is what keeps business and is what keeping business at the moment, as the fittest of them all. Because if you're still, if you're not getting there and you're still stuck in the old way and you're still wanting this kind of structured way of doing whatever, and everything is pointing in a direction that this needs to change. This is archaic. This isn't working. People are changing. The narrative of business is changing. Change, why aren't you changing? And I think that's really so important, especially around business resilience.
And I like what you said there, because the robustness of a business really is sort of built around two halves, and one is being able to accelerate those decisions and understanding, what the resilience capacity is, how the organization is structured for it, and how the leaders can actually work through that to then understanding what those resilience interventions are and how the speed and flexibility and adaptability around that comes to the fore. And part of that is about investment, stuff that we spoke about, don't slash invest, and great technology in place. And then really just understanding the interventions as they happen right through the business. So yeah, definitely the linkage of agility and being able to actually push through those programs are vital in succeeding today.
So while we note agility as a catalyst in driving business resilience, you mentioned 6 dimensions of resilience. What can you share with us in that regard?
Yeah, Kevin, thanks. So there's a hell of a lot of really insightful content on the topic of business resilience on the web, and a lot of this content is really well aggregated and packaged under key themes on McKinsey.com, which, as you know, is one of my favorite resources of content. And it's here that I came across the following important statement, Kevin. The world is experiencing a level of disruption and business risk not seen in generations. Some companies freeze and fail, while others innovate, advance, and even thrive. The difference is resilience. Yeah. And that framework that they talk about there is categorized around 6 themes or 6 dimensions, as I mentioned, and they list these 6 dimensions of resilience as following. First is institutional or business model resilience. Second is financial resilience. Third is operational resilience. Fourth is technological resilience. Fifth is organizational resilience, and last but not least is reputational resilience. And in different conversations over the past year, we've spoken about various topics that actually align very much with these layers of resilience.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you've like it breaks it down into those 6, because all those areas, if they are not coexisting and moving forward together in that forward agility, it's going to be just complete disruption. So there has to be all these dimensions need to be taken care of and looked at, so that the business moves forward together as a whole.
And I like the reference of coexisting, because that's the critical piece here. Is it's not one in isolation of the other, but it's not 2 in isolation of the 3. It's a collective of the 6 themes really coming together to be a critical driver in ensuring resilience and pushing the business forward. So yeah. The key thing for me is, so while there are a huge amount of in-depth analyses on these various dimensions, there's a really great blog article titled Resilience Across 6 Dimensions for Healthy Business Continuity. This was published by Sarah Catherine Tucker on peoplelogic.ai on the 23rd of August 2021, and it actually provides quite a nice succinct overview of each of those dimensions listed, Kevin. So let's take a brief look at each of these, starting with number 1, the institutional resilience or business model resilience. And this point talks about adapting business model resilience for sustained growth. And companies that are able to adapt to the changing global competitive landscape, technology advancements, customer demands, of which there have been many during this period, regulatory changes, or building brand ecosystems with a rich data and digitally driven processes, they are all well positioned to embrace these shifting threads and trends. And we learn that the adoption of new business models within the constraints of those resources and operational budgets will inevitably lead to sustainable growth. The second point is, or at least a dimension, is financial resilience. And this particular point talks about thriving on financial resilience for contingency. And companies need to develop specific financial resilience to withstand the ongoing volatility, balancing between some short-term and long-term financial goals for the business, but with a key focus on financial growth and expectation of expansion. And that is for short-term as well. And what we learn here is that financial resilience actually protects companies against reduced access to debt or capital, or equity based on attributes like stress testing, forecasting, crisis response, and backup planning. And particularly in the short-term view, the majority of those points that I've just mentioned are really compromised. The third point here is operational resilience. And the point here notes that operational resilience actually helps companies perform efficiently. Companies need to prioritize and overcome those disruptions that impact on achieving their goals. And it takes resilience, Kevin, to recover after the disruption or the risk caused either by nature, human disasters, economic downturns, cyber attacks, supply chain issues, which the whole world is facing at the moment, loss of infrastructure, war, civil unrest, again, many factors that are ever evident in the world right now. But what we learn coming out of operational resilience, it positively impacts on a company's overall growth strategy, enabling investments, leading to better business continuity, informing day-to-day decisions, and this in turn stabilizes the company through any of those operational disruptions.
Craig, what I'm noticing about everything you're speaking about is that this doesn't just apply to large corporation. As you're talking about, the business model resilience, as a small business owner, I can, relate directly to why that's important, as well as the financial resilience, the operational resilience, even in small business or medium enterprise, these things, as you're speaking through them now, are still so very applicable that businesses, if you've got a business, this is something you should be considering, because if you don't, one of these areas are probably going to be the thing that really drag you back. Even, technology. If you watch Gary Vee, for example, Gary Vee always speaks about systems. Do you have systems in place? Do you have stuff in place that you don't actually have to stand or sit at your desk and do, that someone else could be doing it, or you could hand it over, even if you're a small business, right?
Yeah.
So it speaks, to business as a whole, which I think is really, really relevant.
And Kevin, I think what's critical here is, no matter how big or small, as you mentioned, the size of the company is what is the ability of the company to execute a strategy in a comprehensive way that allows them to look forward, but disciplined, and being able to ensure that the strategic considerations and the risks are quite clearly understood and referenced in respect of what the endpoint impact or solution may be. And I think the other point there is also, what are the capabilities that actually exist in those smaller businesses that can help bring informed decisions to the fore, because many smaller businesses actually don't have anybody to turn to, and that's why we've spoken about mentors and the likes of leadership sitting outside the organization to help you as a small business and move forward. And then lastly, what are the decision-making processes relative to how quickly in a small business can you make a decision, because you don't have anybody else to bounce it off of. But yeah, those are just points to add to what you've mentioned. But the last three dimensions that are spoken about here, Kevin, is technological resilience. And this point really notes that technology resilience maintains business continuity, and a vitally important point here, because businesses need to implement digital and technological advancement in order to meet what is ever apparent, the ever-changing demands and priorities of customers across the entire experience value chain, as well as keeping pace with the evolving regulatory requirements. And what we learn from this particular dimension is that technological resilient organizations focus on improving incident responses and investing in their IT infrastructure to help reduce technology system outages, manage cyber threats, and other expensive tech breakdowns. And when that platform is in place, you're definitely on a good trajectory to enabling a lot more resilience in your business. The fifth dimension is organizational resilience. And Kevin, this point talks about thinking systematically with organizational resilience. Some businesses are more resilient than their peers just because they're better prepared for adversity and are able to maintain proactive and flexibility when faced with a crisis. And what we learn from this particular dimension is that businesses recruiting and deploying the best talent equitably in their company, reskilling or actually promoting employees based on performance and without lenses of bias, a topic that we've covered at length here, often carry out the operations based on dynamic self-management and continual adaptation techniques. And that in itself, we know the advantage of that particular point. And the final dimension here, Kevin, is reputational resilience. And this point notes specifically that reputational resilience actually strengthens business culture. And we all know that a company's reputation is one of its biggest assets. And when confronted by reputational damage or being questioned, the companies are inevitably judged by the way they respond to and handle a crisis, whether through social media, online, compensation for public products and service faults, etc., or even environmental, social, economic, or geopolitical issues. And what we learn about the sixth dimension is that strong risk culture and institutional resilience are actually critical for any company to overcome uncertainty, and adopting reputational resilience strategies really helps identify the risks from an outside-in perspective and prepares the company for accountability and crisis. And in closing on the six dimensions, Kevin, I'd like to quote a part of a paragraph from Sarah Catherine Tucker's conclusion, where she notes that having a resilient growth strategy imbibed in an organization's culture is integral to align with the company's broader context, its values, and guardianship, allowing the business to thrive and turn risks and uncertainty into new opportunities.
Greg, when you say reputational resilience, it's funny because I've actually done social media training with a few large corporates already, and I think it's so funny that and it's taken some time for corporates to realize that, but if you're working, and I think some corporates, I know that the ones that I've worked with have made it part of your employee contract that if you're working at this company, you are not allowed to conduct yourself badly on social media, right? Because it's directly related to, you are directly bound to that company, and it's true. There's so much. There's so many occurrences that's happened in the last couple of years where, the reputation of a business is in direct damage or in direct line of fire because someone working at a brand went and said something on Twitter, or they they kind of behave badly. So I'm like, again, just teaching people and getting people to understand that data is everywhere, and people can find information about the person they're dealing with, and they'll use negative stuff to kind of try and hurt a reputation. And that's why when I teach this and I share this in training, I was like, never ever say anything negative about anything on social media, especially if you're working for a big corporate, because chances are you can land yourself into some hot water or just get fired.
Yeah. So Kevin, I'd like to read it because I've always got this paragraph from McKinsey at hand, the resilience imperative, succeeding in certain times. And their paragraph around reputational resilience is really deep and quite instructive. And it says that you are what you do. Resilient institutions align their values with their actions, with their words. A
Yes.
wide range of stakeholders, from employees to customers, to regulators, to investors, to society at large, increasingly look to hold the firms accountable in a range of ways, spanning from their brand promise to their stance on environmental and social issues, and obviously governance, the ESG issues. Reliance demands a strong sense of self enshrined in mission, values, and purpose, which guides actions. It also requires flexibility and openness in listening to and communicating with the stakeholders, anticipating and addressing societal expectations, and responding to criticism of firm behavior. So really very detailed but authoritative stance on ensuring that reputational resilience is well entrenched and embedded in the organization.
Yeah,
I'm glad you picked up on that particular point. Thanks.
You need to please share that with me, because I will definitely use it. I want to put it on in the description box in this video, because it's so important. It's so important that people understand the weight that it carries, especially if you're building a brand, and how the employees of that brand are in support of the reputation of the brand. And it's vitally important. So as we draw to the end of the show, Craig, so what can you share with the listeners as a summary of today's conversation?
Yeah, Kevin, the key takeaway for today's conversation, I want to reference the article titled 5 Key Areas of Focus for Resilience Management in 2022. It was published quite recently, 10th of February 2022 on Forbes.com by Brian Zawada. He's the Chief Operating Officer for Castellan Solutions, which was going, spent some time looking at Castellan Solutions, quite an awesome organization. And we note from him in the opening portion of the article that leadership teams must have the ability to persevere during times of uncertainty, and that leaders themselves must focus on 5 core topics and take a disciplined, intentional approach to each of them. So it's the 5 core topics, at least the 5 core themes in this instance, which are identified as: model the end-to-end, establish a position of relevance, measure resilience capacity based on plausible scenarios, establish crisis management as a core competency, and lastly, be being proactive and practice. And that talks about the iterative process. So let's quickly look at each of those points. So the first is model the end-to-end. Companies must know what their most important product and services are, Kevin. It's obvious. And they need to understand what is needed to make those products and services successful, and what processes, resources, etc., combine to actually create value in the marketplace, and then how these are distributed across each of the customer segments. And once this is understood, leadership teams need to be ready to leverage that information to create what-if plans and to use any of the insights gained amid disruption in order to predict potential downstream or secondary consequences. So understanding the end-to-end proposition there. The second point that he references is to establish a position of readiness, and the company's ability to actually better control vulnerabilities and reduce the frequency of potential disruption is known as readiness. And a proactive approach is often more successful than implementing a reactive solution, which we all know to be true. A combination, however, of the proactive and reactive does provide a company with the tools to prevent potential disruptions, as well as being able to quickly and effectively recover from those, Kevin. And leaders can take steps to attaining the highest standards by knowing and addressing single points of failure in that contingent strategy to overcome the points of failures. So getting that particular balance right. The third point here is measuring resilience capability based on plausible scenarios. And I really like this point because I don't think enough time is spent in actually scenario planning one's way through, not just challenging issues, but successful issues as well. So leaders need to ask the right questions in order to actually understand the company's level of preparedness for disruption in this instance, but also, let's put the spectrum of success in place there as well as define what their biggest worries are, whether in the form of IT issues, cyber attacks, shortage of raw materials, lack of suitably skilled resources. Again, the last two are fundamental issues that are presenting big challenges to the world as we know it today. And it's essential to map out and define those various scenarios that could actually lead to business continuity disruption and map them out end to end, including maintenance and resolution models, which will all lead to a set of proactive actions that will bolster the company's level of preparedness for any disruption. The fourth and second last point here is establish crisis management as a core competency. When last did you hear anybody mention crisis management as a core competency? Never. Yeah. So,
exactly.
So while it's greatly beneficial to define those plausible scenarios that I've just mentioned, can leaders really predict every potential source of disruption? Obviously not. But companies need to establish teams and strategies that actually practice situational awareness, as these most definitely help the organizations maintain some kind of operational resilience and continuity and allow it to respond, communicate, and recover from a broad range of potential sources of disruption, Kevin. And being able to predict the escalating crisis as well as creating strategies to deal with it is really equally important in meeting the objectives of crisis readiness. And then the last point here is about being proactive and practice. Again, the culmination of the last 2 points and is identifying possible scenarios, but actually practice a response to those crisis situations with all of the stakeholders, from your leadership teams to board members, staff, and even your suppliers where you can. Take the time to discuss those crucial decisions and the steps that the company needs actually to take to minimize the consequences of those disruptions, and develop the crisis communication messaging and practice the delivering on each of the audience segments and stakeholder groups on a regular basis. Yeah, Kevin, and in closing, building a resilient company is definitely not just about knowing how to deliver ideas at scale or knowing how to promote those ideas in different markets, but it's about how to survive and navigate through the many setbacks, mistakes, and disasters that are regularly presented around each of the corners that we don't even see coming. And those are the key takeaway points for today.
Yeah, Craig, and I think, some of the core competencies that you speak of, just the position of the established position of readiness. I've mentioned it before, but the law of requisite variety always speaks to the person who has the most flexibility of choices and behavior rules the system, right? And very often you find yourself in your system, your business, in your department, in whatever system you're in. When you have more choices of behavior and choices of how you can make decisions, right? You're the one that rules the system. But if you're not agile enough to be able to do that, you just get caught back up in lagging with the rest of the people who are actually, agile enough to do that. So it's always interesting how, it ties back to the ability that's the human element comes into playing, or to all of these core competencies. It's amazing.
Yes.
So, Craig, to conclude today's show, what do we have up for next week?
Yeah, Kevin. So for next week, what I'd like to do is actually just, in a way, it's picking up on the theme of resilience, because I'm coming across a lot of content in how retail companies are actually either battling or forging ahead in a really positive way. So I want to look at some of the learning from the global retail industry on the back of these tough economic and political changes that we're currently faced with, and actually get to see who the resilient ones are. And there's some fascinating stats that are coming out in this regard. But also I thought, whilst you ask about next week, I thought it's worthwhile mentioning 2 weeks ahead a session as well, Kevin, because we're hosting our first LinkedIn live show on Thursday the 23rd of June, which will be a key milestone in the Lunchtime Marketing and Leadership series, and one where we're going to kick off with a special guest joining us on the show as well. So really excited about the next 2 weeks ahead.
Absolutely, me too. It is a milestone, because we've done, how many shows is today?
66, I think it is today.
60. Craig, when we get to 100, we literally we should get drunk on camera and just be, and you should do it together. We should just do this at a whiskey bar and just have
I think that's a damn fine idea. Maybe we need to go and talk to Whiskey Brothers to host our 100th show in their wonderful little tasting room, and just maybe get some of the brand managers around some of the whiskeys there and turn it into a brand experience as well.
The perfect example. That's exactly what we should do, Craig.
Leave it to me.
Guys, you can catch the Lunchtime series on all major podcast channels and every Thursday on eBiz Radio. Craig, thank you so much. Have a fantastic day, and thanks for chatting.
Yeah, looking forward to next week. Same to you, Kevin. Thanks.
Cheers. Bye.